Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today I'm cooking a noodle dish that I've been eating since I was a little kid, which is called Dan Dan Mian. Dan Dan Mian is one of those Chinese noodle dishes that kind of translates across a lot of different cultures. The one that I'm making today is particularly drawn from Szechuan food, and it makes a few decisions that I personally tend toward the Americanized decisions because that's what I was eating when I grew up. So they're the ones that I like to eat. So I did do a recipe for this particular Dan Dan Mian up on my YouTube channel a couple months ago, and some folks are asking about how to make it a little bit more traditional. So I'm going to do a couple tweaks to it today. This is too much garlic. That will be more closely replicating what you would more frequently see in like super traditional Dan Dan Mian, lots of which I'm going to be borrowing some of these techniques from Kenji Lopez, and sort of like the way that he does it, but mostly what I'm doing is replicating the way that I've seen it done at a restaurant. The way that I've seen it done at a restaurant here in Oakland called Guilin Noodles, which is here in Chinatown in Oakland. Oh, we just lost the Reddit stream. Let's kick that back up. So that's the version that I'm going to be making today. You will, if you have seen it up on YouTube, I did a YouTube video recipe for this a couple months ago, and I used peanut butter, which is my personal favorite of method of making this, and that's definitely the American version of Dan Dan Mian, is using peanut butter. More frequently, you will see the use of something like tahini or sometimes sesame paste. So I'm going to be using sesame paste today, which is definitely the more traditional Szechuan route to making Dan Dan Mian. So that's probably the most traditional way of making Dan Dan Mian, but it's also one of those recipes where it's sort of like just depending on like where you are in the world, who's making it, and just like what's in the fridge, I guess. You will see it made very, very differently in all kinds of ways. But the super traditional method of making Dan Dan Mian uses a liquid base, so very frequently it'll be done with chicken stock or beef stock. Today we're going to be using beef stock. I've also seen it done with drawing influence from Italian food and just making it from pasta water. And then there will be a liquid base at the very bottom of the bowl, and then noodles in the middle, and then a meat base at the top. And then what happens is over the course of the time that you eat it, it starts thickening up, and that's because the sauce base underneath is starting to hydrate the noodles themselves, and then it turns into like a more of a pasty dish. But so it kind of develops over the time that you're eating it, so it starts off kind of liquidy and soupy, and then as you eat, it turns into a kind of a thicker, more like bolognese sort of sauce. So this is definitely one of my favorite dishes, this or dajjamyeon, probably two of my favorite Chinese noodle dishes of all time. So I'm going to be taking a shot at how I've seen traditional Dan Dan Mian made. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the comments. I don't know everything about Dan Dan Mian, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, at the very least entertaining to watch. Do I make the same 3 dishes every night? Not really. Probably like the same. We cycle through like the same like 15 dishes. So what we're cooking through are basically all of the recipes that are up on the YouTube channel. But definitely make a lot of the same things multiple times, because essentially what I'm doing is just cooking dinner. So it's all things that I like to eat. So, but very frequently, yeah. So if you're asking Dan Dan Mian, this is definitely a dish that I've made on stream before. Made it in a few different ways, but today actually we're making it in a way that I have never actually made on stream, or really actually ever attempted at all, because we're doing it super traditional. So we're definitely going for a super traditional method of cooking Dan Dan Mian. which is not my personal approach to making Dan Dan Mian, just because I like the more Americanized versions of Dan Dan Mian myself. Right, so as with many dishes many recipes that I write, we're starting off with some crushed and minced garlic, followed by some finely minced ginger. If you notice today, we have fresh ginger for the first time in a while, because I finally went out and bought some. The really nice quality about fresh ginger that you may or may not notice if you've ever worked with ginger is that when it's fresh, the skin is pretty edible because it doesn't have any real qualities. This is just really what ginger looks like when it starts drying out. So it's like the dry edges. But when it's really, really fresh, it's also very hydrated. So it's very liquidy because ginger is essentially a root. So at this point, when your ginger is that fresh, you really don't need to peel it. I still peeled it for no real reason other than I just didn't feel like washing it, so I peeled it off anyway. But when your ginger is that fresh, you can totally eat that skin and it will just be fine. Right, and that is our ginger. So we're going for a pretty fine mince there. Some folks have asked me what the secret is to a fine mince. There's no real secret to a fine mince. It's really just run your knife through it as persistently as you can. And if you really don't like doing it, get out your microplanes and it'll work that way too. Okay, so next, most traditional, or most of the time when I make Dan Dan Mian, I will use a carrot and cucumbers. That's definitely drawing influence from the Americanized versions of Dan Dan Mian. Today I'm actually not going to use a carrot. I'm going to do some of the more traditional decisions with Dan Dan Mian, and I'm actually going to use cilantro and some green onions. So if you're following along on YouTube and following along with the recipe that we posted earlier, you could totally use the cucumbers and carrots, and essentially what we're doing with those is using them as garnish, so they're going to be added at the very, very end. We're going to be doing the same thing with the cilantro too. So if you're following along and you bought yourself some cucumbers and carrots and do not have cilantro, that's totally fine too. You can do the exact same thing, but just with cucumbers and carrots. For my green onions though, I'm separating these, the whites and greens here. So this is the whites of my green onions, and I'm going for pretty small slices here. What we're going to do is use our whites as elements from our aromatics. So we're going to throw these in with our ginger and garlic. That's going to go in very early. And then the greens are not going to go into the wok at all. Those are just going to go straight into the bowl as a garnish on top. So it will be that and the cilantro will be the two elements that are not going to get cooked at all. Don't use the root. I do use the root. I like to save the roots of my green onions, so you probably shouldn't eat the roots because they don't really do anything. But what I like to do is, so when I work with green onions, go grab them. Green onions, when you buy them in the grocery store, they come with the roots still attached. Hopefully they do. If your green onions don't have the roots still attached, which has happened to me once in a while, that means that you bought shitty green onions. So you look for the green onions, make sure that they still have these roots attached. If you're not going to do what I do, at the very least what it ensures is that your green onions are still fresh, because this implies that your green onions are still living. And what I usually do is I chop off the very, very bottom here, and I like to put it in the soil. Or you could even just put it in a glass of water and it will sprout into a new green onion. So I usually chop off the very, very bottom of my green onions and save it for gardening later on. So in the back, in my garden, there's a couple planters. There's probably like 50 or 60 green onions at this point that's kind of sprouting. And that's what I usually use anytime that I forget to buy green onions. So, good question though. So for our greens, I'm chopping these up on a bias. So if you are familiar with the process of slicing green onions, anytime that especially when you're slicing the greens, you want to use a back slice here. So I'm not chopping downward, so this would be downward. What we want to do is move backward, so we're pulling on the knife instead of pushing. And what happens is with a back slice is you get a much gentler cut. So you get a much finer chop that doesn't leave a lot of the residuals from your green onions sitting on your cutting board. So if you push downward on your cuts the way that you would chop like a carrot or a celery or something, lots of times what will happen is the green onions themselves will start fracturing cell structures, and that will leave everything on the cutting board, which is not what we're after. All right, so that is our greens. And we're gonna set that aside. And then the last veggie, is the last veggie? Yes, so the very last veggie I'm going to do is some cilantro. I'm just gonna give these a rough chop. We don't need to be super particular about it, although I'm not particularly a fan of the stems of cilantro, so I am going to remove the stems here. We're gonna give a rough chop to these, and that's going to be the second garnish. So we don't need to be super fine, we just want to make sure that there's no large chunks of cilantro floating around. Right, so that is our cilantro. Hello to everyone just joining, my name is Wesley, this is Wu Can Cook. Today I'm cooking a Szechuan noodle dish called Dan Dan Mian. Dan Dan Mian, if you're not familiar, leans very heavily on the use of sesame paste. So most frequently you'll see it made with tahini. Today I'm going to be using sesame paste. I've also made it with peanut butter in the past, which is my favorite way of making it because it's super Americanized, and that's the way that I grew up eating it, was a super Americanized Dan Dan Mian. Definitely all kinds of ways to make Dan Dan Mian. It's also a super simple dish too, which makes it very adaptable. So you can really make it however you like to make it, and change it to however you like it. Actually, we're not done chopping that all. If you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the comments. I don't know everything about Dan Dan Mian or wok cooking or Chinese cooking in general, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least entertaining to watch. So. Next I'm going to be doing, so this is some thick cut bacon. You will frequently see me using thick cut bacon in a lot of Chinese foods. That's not because thick cut bacon is common in traditional Chinese food, it's because pork fat, and more commonly pork belly, is super commonly pops up in Chinese cuisine. And if you can't get your hands on pork belly or just plain old pork fat, then the next thing that I love using is thick cut bacon, because thick cut bacon has a whole bunch of fat going on. So when we use thick cut bacon, what we're after is not necessarily the flavor of bacon in the way that you would use bacon for things like eggs and bacon. What we're after is all of this white fat. So that's probably the part that you leave on the breakfast plate when you're done eating your pancakes. We want all of that because that's going to turn into cooking fat. So we're going to use that to develop the fatty base element for our Dan Dan Mian. Which helps also because we're not actually using ground pork today, which is probably the most traditional thing to do. We're actually using a leaner cut of ground turkey. And I found that if you pair ground turkey with bacon fat, it works really great. So that's what we're going to be doing. Can you cook a wok recipe without a wok pan? Definitely. You have a normal nonstick pan? Yeah. Nonstick pans are probably the one thing I wouldn't use, but you can totally cook a wok recipe on anything that retains high heat. So before I got really into wok cooking, I would just do lots of these similar recipes on a skillet. So you can make it a similar thing on a stainless steel skillet or a cast iron skillet, even a carbon steel skillet, really anything that retains high heat. So that means probably the one thing that you don't want to use is a nonstick pan, because nonstick pans have a Teflon coating on it, which makes it, Teflon coating has an attribute about it that keeps it from getting really, really hot. That's just the attribute of Teflon, which makes it problematic when you are trying to cook on super, super high heat like we do with wok cooking. Because you're going to run into problems where your pan won't get hot enough. And that's the main problem with Teflon. but really any other kind of skillet will work as long as it's not a nonstick. So that's the one thing I would avoid if you're trying to venture into wok cooking and you don't own a wok, is just avoid a Teflon nonstick. Good question though. Yeah, thanks for asking. Thanks, Dustin. Right. So next, I'm going to do a quick marinade on our ground meat here. So most traditionally in Szechuan Dan Dan Mian, you would see the use of ground pork. I ran out of ground pork. I love doing it with ground pork. It's super tasty because ground pork has a whole bunch of fat. I ran out of ground pork and I actually was not able to get any at the grocery store, which is going to be okay. I've done this with pretty much every kind of ground mince that I can think of. I've done it with ground chicken, ground turkey, ground beef, ground pork. I've even done it with ground lamb, which was pretty weird. Really, any kind of ground mince will work. The one thing I will say is if you're using a leaner cut of meat, so if you're not using pork and you're not using 80-20 beef chuck, you do need to supplement the loss of fat, because so what we're using today is ground turkey. Ground turkey is super lean. I think this is like a 90-10 cut of ground turkey, which means 90% lean, 10% fat. So since there's very little fat in our ground meat today, you do want to supplement that fat with something else. What we're supplementing it with today is the use of bacon fat, which I think actually works super well. And if you don't have ground pork, that'll work just fine. All right, so for our ground meat, I'm going to do a quick marinade, nothing super complicated, but that's 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, a pinch of kosher salt, and then I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing wine here. All right, so I'm giving this a quick marinade in our liquid here. Yeah. And what we're really after here is we're trying to make sure that we don't build up too much moisture in our marinade, because at this point, if there's too much moisture in your ground meat, when it goes into the wok, you're going to have lots of moisture in the wok too. So if there's one takeaway that I hope you learn from all of these streams about wok cooking, is that the biggest enemy of wok cooking is moisture, because the more moisture that ends up in your wok, the more trouble you're going to have retaining heat. So in our constant battle to retain heat, what we're constantly doing is just trying to make sure that there's as little moisture as possible, which is probably, in my opinion, one of the biggest differences between making noodles in Chinese cooking versus making noodles in Italian cooking. Whereas like in Italian cooking, we're constantly okay with, or we're constantly incorporating pasta water and liquids and other like liquid elements to create creamy sauces. That's not a thing that we do in Chinese cooking for sure. So there is that staple of like that really iconic staple of Italian cooking, where we constantly, anytime we cook pasta, what they say is number 1, season your pasta water really salty, and then number 2, always reserve some of that pasta water so you can help use it to create a super starchy and a super like creamy and luxurious pasta sauce. That's not something we do in Chinese cooking. So when I started learning more about Italian cooking, that was a big shocker to me, because that's definitely not something that you do when you make Asian noodles, for sure. All right, so next I'm going to assemble my sauce before we move on to our noodles. The sauce elements here will be the basis of our noodles themselves. So when we assemble this sauce, it's actually not going to go into the wok. So this is going to be a little bit different from the way that I have approached this before in the recipe video, at least for the recipe video that I did for this particular dish, in which I assembled the sauce and then we throw the sauce into the wok. That's how you would make things like chow mein, really any kind of like wok fried noodle, same way that you would approach pad thai, pad see ew, Thai wok cooking. All of those things, that what we're doing is we're assembling the sauce as with like we're assembling the whole dish inside of the wok. So the way that Dan Dan noodles work, we're not actually going to put the liquid elements into the wok at any point. So all of these liquid elements, they're just going to go straight into our serving bowl. And that's what's going to happen is we're going to toss it at the very, very end. And that's how you're going to you start your noodle dish as it kind of looks a little bit soupy because it's really, really liquidy because it's literally just the liquids of your sauce. And then as you start eating, that sesame paste starts incorporating with your noodles a little bit, and then it starts turning into a much more thick and creamy sauce. All right, so for our sauce, I'm starting out with, this is going to be 4 tablespoons of soy sauce. Followed by 2 tablespoons of sesame oil. Sesame oil, if you've ever used it before, especially toasted sesame oil, is very pungent and can be very overpowering if you're too aggressive with your use of it. So anytime that you use sesame oil, you really don't want to be using at any point more than 2 tablespoons max of sesame oil because it's very, very overpowering if you use too much of it. Right. So next I'm using, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar. Rice vinegar, if you don't have rice vinegar, you can just use plain old distilled white vinegar, and it will be pretty similar. Right, so then I'm going to use, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, actually just 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. This is definitely, the use of brown sugar is not common in Chinese cooking, so that definitely does not come from traditional Chinese cooking. That comes from Americanized Chinese cooking. But I actually think it tastes really good, and I oftentimes will incorporate elements of Americanized Chinese food in my recipes because I find that they're really tasty. So, all right, next I'm using, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of doubanjiang, which is a fermented chili paste. If you don't have doubanjiang or you can't get your hands on any, you can also use gochujang, which is a Korean fermented chili paste. Or if you can't find that either, you can also use miso paste. All 3 of those are pretty similar in their use of umami, so and fermentation. Next I'm going to add, this is going to be 2/3 cup of beef stock, actually this is beef stock. If you don't, this is a homemade beef stock, but if you don't have a homemade beef stock, you can also just use plain old chicken bouillon or powdered stock. That will also work just fine too. I have also seen, so I was looking into how Kenji Lopez makes this particular Dan Dan Mian, and what he uses is, so he also recommends using stock, but what he frequently uses is pasta water, which I'm sure comes from the method of cooking from Italian cooking. And essentially what we're going for here in the use of this liquid element is a thickening agent. So what we're trying to do is create a thicker, more starchy sauce. So the same thing that we do in Italian cooking where we use pasta water, and what we're doing when we use pasta water in Italian cooking is incorporating starch into your sauces, which helps create a much thicker, more rich and luxurious sauce. We're going to do the same thing in this particular recipe, but instead of using pasta water, we're going to use beef stock. All right, so the very last element that we're using today, so this is going to be just straight up sesame paste. So if you can't find sesame paste, you can also use tahini. Tahini is still essentially sesame paste, but I believe comes from Mediterranean cooking. I think Greek or generally Mediterranean cooking. If you can't find either of those things, I also have very, very frequently just made this with plain old Skiffy peanut butter, and that will work just fine too. The use of peanut butter is definitely the most Americanized approach to Dan Dan Mian, and I think sesame paste probably the most traditional approach. So I'm using, this is going to be 4 tablespoons of sesame paste. Feels like a little bit too much. Let's make it 3. Yeah, let's do 3.5. Right, so we're going to stir this to incorporate. Sesame paste is already pretty loose, so You shouldn't have too much trouble breaking this stuff down in your sauces, but if you do find that it's becoming problematic, get a whisk out and whisk that stuff up together, and that will definitely do the trick for you. Alright, so that is our sauce element. So this is the wet element that we would normally, when in my approach to Dan Dan Mian, would be throwing into the bottom of the wok. What we're going to do today, though, is actually, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is drop this right into our serving bowl, which is the Szechuan approach to Dan Dan Mian. So this is literally the bowl that I'm going to be eating out of, and then what we're going to do is drop this, just about half of it, into the bottom of our bowl. And then what we're going to do is we're going to assemble this in layers. So this comes from street cooking, so this is like definitely a thing that developed out of the artifact of just cooking on the street and needing to assemble stuff really, really quick. But it's definitely super traditional too. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our cooked noodles right on top of this, and then what we're going to do is put our meats and our garnishes on top of that. And what we're going to do after that is toss everything together, and we're going to have a very interesting Dan Dan noodle. Right, so and everything. Not quite. Right. The last thing I'm going to do before we move over to our stove is crush up a few elements into our mortar and pestle. I'm going to start by crushing up some Szechuan peppercorn. Szechuan peppercorn, probably one of the most iconic elements of Szechuan food. And if you're not familiar with Szechuan peppercorn, it is a very unique type of spiciness and heat that I don't know any other spice that it behaves in a similar way to Szechuan peppercorn. And that's because Szechuan peppercorn has an attribute about it that when you add it as a garnish at the very, very end, it causes a numbing effect. So it's why lots of people will refer to Szechuan food as numbing food. Or like you might have heard like the dish numbing beef, which is Szechuan beef, with a whole bunch of Szechuan peppercorn, which creates that numbing effect. So it's also extremely tasty, not just super spicy. But because it's so spicy, you do want to make sure that you use the stuff sparingly. So don't use too much of it, or else it will easily overpower the dish, and then it will just be spicy. Unless you love spicy stuff, then go crazy. Right, so I'm going to set this aside. I have also seen some folks recommend toasting this stuff too. That probably is really tasty, and I think the reasoning behind toasting your Szechuan peppercorn is that when you toast it, it releases some more of the spiciness. So if you toast it in a dry pan, it's really, really tasty. I've never actually done that, but it sounds, the science behind it definitely holds up. So. Right, so the very last thing that we're going to do before we move over to the stove is crush up some peanuts. These are pre-toasted. These aren't planer peanuts, but they're essentially planer peanuts. I have also done it with raw peanuts, but I found that pre-toasting your own raw peanuts doesn't really add very much, so I stopped doing it because you don't really gain anything by toasting your own peanuts. So I just started buying toasted peanuts and then crushing them up myself. So. I do strongly recommend using a mortar and pestle, though, as opposed to grinding these elements in like a pepper grinder, which I've also done. But I found that using a mortar and pestle, it's a little bit more gentle on the crush, and it also gives us a more inconsistent quality about the things that we're grinding. So especially with these peanuts, you'll notice that some are really, really fine. Some still have pretty large chunks of peanut going on, and that's really nice because when you're eating it, you'll have nice surprises of little bits of pieces of peanut that are in various different sizes. So that's really nice. Alright, so I'm setting all of that aside and we're heading over to our stove. So over on our stove, if you've ever seen me use bacon before in a Chinese wok recipe, you'll know that over on our stove, our wok for the first time in a while is not preheating at all. It's an ice cold wok. And I'm throwing my bacon into our wok while it's cold, so that we can use the cold temperatures of a wok to render out that bacon fat. What we're going to do is render all of our solidified bacon fat into a liquid form, and that's going to be the thing that we use to cook in. So in lieu of using vegetable oil, we're going to be using bacon fat. So yesterday we did something very similar with our fried rice. We did the same thing with our fried rice yesterday, which also used bacon fat and also renders out a nice bacon fat base for our wok cook. All right, I have my wok. This is at very low temperature, and we're very, very gradually going to start increasing the temperature of our wok heat. So we're at low, just straight up low. And we're going to let our wok come up to temperature very gradually, probably over the course of the next 5 minutes. And once it hits a probably about medium heat, we're going to have a lot of rendered bacon fat, so a lot of liquid fat going on the bottom of our wok, and that's going to be the element that we use to start cooking on top of. So very useful, the use of bacon fat. So in traditional Chinese cooking, more frequently, you definitely won't find the use of bacon, but more frequently you'll find the use of pork belly, or oftentimes just straight up pork fat. So I've seen some recipes that just literally call for pork fat. Either of those will work. I don't even know where you can find just plain pork fat. But I've definitely found that the use of bacon fat works really great because it's bacon fat. So no one gets mad about bacon fat. All right, so we're at about medium low, and we're going to let that come up to temperature for probably another 20 minutes, another maybe like 4 minutes maybe. And that's going to give us a lot of time to let some of that fat turn into a liquid form. All right. Hello to everyone just joining. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we're making a Szechuan noodle dish called Dan Dan Mian. Dan Dan Mian, if you're not familiar, is probably more commonly referred to as like sesame noodles or peanut sauce noodles, I guess, would be the super common, probably like the Americanized term that I've seen thrown around a lot is Szechuan noodle or peanut sauce noodle or sesame peanut sauce noodle, something like that. The version that I wrote a recipe for is up on my YouTube channel, as with everything else that we cook on these streams. But the version that I did is a much more Americanized version than what we're doing today. And the reason for that is because it uses peanut butter, which is my favorite way of preparing Dan Dan Mian. But I was researching a little bit more and inspired to take a shot at doing a super traditional Dan Dan Mian. A couple people actually asked me to take a shot at it too. So I thought I would take a look into it. What I am driving towards today is actually one specific Dan Dan Mian that you can get your hands on here in Oakland, at least, from a restaurant in Chinatown called Guilin Noodle. Guilin Noodle is a Szechuan restaurant. It's been closed for a while because of COVID. But the quality of their noodle is that almost everything all of the noodles that you order there comes in one specific preparation of Szechuan noodle, in which at the very bottom of the bowl is all of our liquid elements, and then in the middle of the bowl is all of our noodles, and then at the top is our meats and garnishes. So what you do with that bowl is you toss it together, and at the very, very beginning of the meal, when you first toss it, you have kind of a soupy noodle, and then as you eat, those sauces start hydrating the noodles and incorporating a little bit more, and then it kind of turns into a much more thick and like creamy sauce because of the tahini and sesame paste and all of those other elements that you're eating. So it's one of those noodle dishes in which it sort of like develops over the period of time in which you're eating, which is really nice and like tasty. Zerker, yeah, great to see you too. Thanks for coming back. All right, so our wok this is now at medium heat. We're gradually going to let this come up to temperature for another maybe 3 minutes or so. For those of you just joining, today we're making a Dan Dan Mian, which is a Szechuan noodle dish. If you're interested in this particular recipe, as with everything that we cook on streams, there's an associated recipe video that goes along with it. That's always going to be up on my YouTube, so a couple of you, a number of folks actually, are watching over on YouTube. YouTube, in addition to being where we also live stream on YouTube now too. But if you're already over there on YouTube or you're not there yet, if you visit the channel page itself, which is youtube.com/woocancook, all of the recipe videos live over on that channel. So if you're interested in cooking along with me, so lots of times, actually I'm trying to get into the habit of doing it every time I stream. I'll post what we're going to be cooking, and you can cook alongside me. So you can take a look at what we're cooking and then take a look at the ingredients list, pick up what you need, and then you can cook this with me. Right, we're just past medium heat, and we're going to let that come in up a little bit more. What's in there so far? Yeah, so far all we've added is bacon, so we haven't done anything else yet, although we have done a lot of chopping. So what we're going to add next is all of our aromatic elements. So we're going to do our ginger, garlic, and the whites of our green onions. That's going to go in and bloom out all of those aromatic qualities. Then we're going to add our meats and give all of that a toss. And that is actually everything that we're going to cook in our wok. The rest of it is actually going to come together in our serving bowl. So very interesting preparation of noodles. For our bacon, we're bringing up the wok heat very, very gradually. So over the course of maybe 5 minutes, we're going to bring up the heat here. What that's doing is replicating the quality that you get when you put bacon into a cold Dutch oven or stock pot. And what happens in those pans is the pan, because it's so thick, will take a really, really long time to come up to temperature. A Dutch oven will take maybe 10 minutes to come up to high heat. So if you turn the fire on under a Dutch oven, because it's made of cast iron, it takes about 10 minutes to heat up. What happens is, because the Dutch oven heats up so slowly, is that slow heat up time causes all of the bacon fat to render into a liquid form. Now with a wok, because a wok is much, much thinner than a Dutch oven or a stock pot, you can't do the same thing in a wok, because if you were to do that in a wok and just turn the fire on, that wok would come up to temperature within maybe 15 to 20 seconds, because a wok is very, very thin and heats up and also cools down much, much quicker. So in order to replicate this process that we do in the Dutch oven, we're starting off our heat at very, very low, so about as low as our heat will go. And then we're going to gradually bring up the temperature of our wok over the next maybe 10 minutes. That. All right, so if you notice at the bottom of our wok, we have a lot of bacon fat rendering. So down here at the bottom of our wok, there's all of this liquid bacon fat, and that's really, really essential to what we're going to be cooking. I'm going to let that go for maybe another minute, and that is going to be what we're cooking in. So we're going to build our castle on top of our bacon fat. Wok recommendations, yeah, not in particular. Lots of folks ask me for recommendations on woks. Really, the only thing that I'll recommend is the quality of metal that you're purchasing. So I love the wok that I'm using is made out of carbon steel. I also love a stainless steel wok. My parents cook on a stainless steel wok. Those work out really great too. And I also love a good cast iron wok. The only real thing that I recommend not doing is a non-stick wok, so Teflon non-stick woks. I don't even know why they make those. But unfortunately, when you go shopping for woks at like Target or Walmart, those are the ones that you see most frequently. But the problem with those is that, someone also asked this on YouTube too, is that non-stick Teflon does not get hot enough for wok cooking. So I have no idea why you would want a wok with non-stick coating, but it definitely is not going to work. So. All right, so I need a little bit more bacon fat than we were able to render, so I'm bolstering this with a tiny bit of vegetable oil, and then I'm going to add my aromatic ingredients. So this is my ginger, followed by my garlic, or this is the whites of my green onions, and my garlic. All right, and we're letting this bloom in our oil for about maybe 20 seconds, just long enough for that to become fragrant. So you really want to use your nose at this point and let it go for long enough until you start smelling ginger, garlic, and green onion. So once you start smelling those elements coming out, then you know you're ready to move on to your next ingredient. The thing moving on top of the fridge. I don't know. Hopefully not a rat. Yeah. Hello to everyone just joining. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a Szechuan noodle dish called Dan Dan Mian. I also did a recipe video for this, but I did a more Americanized version. So today we're doing a more traditional approach to Dan Dan Mian. If you're interested in reproducing this particular dish yourself, I recommend hopping over to our YouTube channel where a couple folks are already watching, where we're also live streaming. But over on YouTube is where we have most of our recorded content. So generally everything that we cook on live stream will have an associated recipe video that goes along with it. And those recipe videos will always live up on our YouTube channel. So we're posting new recipes every Friday. So last Friday we did a recipe for, what did we do last Friday? Sweet custard buns. We did the sweet custard buns from Legend of Korra. This Friday, so tomorrow, we're going to be releasing a recipe for a Chinese soup that I've been eating since I was a little kid, which is called Westlake soup. We've been posting new stuff every Friday, so we also did a bunch of stuff from Panda Express. So we did the Kung Pao chicken, Beijing beef is coming up soon, General Tso's chicken, sesame chicken. I've been on a Thai noodle kick lately, so we did a pad Thai and have a pad see coming up soon. So all that stuff coming up very soon over on the YouTube channel. So if you're not already there, or you are already there and you want to learn more about what we're cooking, I recommend hopping to the channel and giving that a subscribe. So hopefully when you do subscribe, there should be a hamster eating ramen. He's my favorite little guy. His name is Hamchara. All right, so I just added my ground meat and I gave it a toss that went for about 5, maybe like a minute or 2. I bet like a minute or 3. We do want it to be cooked all the way through. There's not going to be any other residual cook happening here, so we're looking to make sure that our noodles or our meat elements are completely cooked. And then I am, change this one, removing this from our wok. All right, so we're removing this from heat. We're making sure that we get all of that fat out from here too. That's going to be all of our flavor. We don't want to dump that. And we're actually done cooking in our wok. So anytime that you finish cooking on your wok, the very first thing that you should do before you even put it back down is give it a rinse. And what that does is rinses all of that stuff that has the potential of sticking to your wok. So a hot wok, I say this after almost every stream now, but a hot wok is much, much easier to clean than a cold wok. So if you finish cooking on your wok and then you set it down and you go sit down to eat and then come back an hour later and try to clean it then, anyone who's ever tried to clean a cold wok that has food stuck on it knows that it's much, much harder to clean a cold wok than a hot wok. So good wok care, always make sure to clean your wok off immediately after finishing because it's a lot easier. And also, if you have stuff stuck to your wok, you probably will have to start scrubbing it, which will run the potential for scratching your woks, which is not good. Right, so I'm giving that a wipe down with a paper towel. There's actually quite a bit of fat left behind already, so I'm actually not going to season it today. But if your wok is particularly dry and not oily, give it a little bit of vegetable oil and wipe that down with some vegetable oil. And that will give it a nice coating. Will the heat of the wok burn the garlic? Yeah, lots of folks ask me that too. A lot of folks are afraid of adding their garlic too early because they're worried that the garlic is going to burn. And that's because garlic cooks very, very quickly. It's not a very sturdy veggie. So if you add garlic in really, really early, essentially what happens is it will start burning if you're not very careful with it. That is not going to be a problem as long as you make sure that you approach your aromatics in a very specific way. So all three elements that we used in our aromatics today. So aromatics meaning the elements that carry aromatic flavor. So today those aromatics were garlic, ginger, and then the whites of our green onions. Those would be the aromatic elements that we're adding that impart umami and flavor. We want to, anytime you're working with aromatic elements, you want to make sure and add that stuff pretty early. Mostly because you want to make sure that those elements make solid contact with the hot parts of your wok. So you want to add those elements while the wok is still relatively empty, because once it makes contact with that oil, it's going to release all of that aromatic quality. So we add that stuff super early in order to make contact with as much oil and heat as possible so that you can release all of that fragrance. Now, if you are not careful about it and you just let it go for a little while, then it will definitely burn. So it definitely has the potential to burn if you're not careful about what you do next. So as long as you proceed after adding those aromatic elements with the next ingredient, so in this case the next thing that we added was our ground meat, it definitely is not going to burn because there's more elements going on in the wok. So once you add your ground meat and you kind of let everything incorporate with that ground meat, so once you let all of your aromatic elements incorporate with the ground meat, then it really doesn't have the risk of burning. But if you're not careful and you let it go for too long, so if you add your ginger and garlic and green onions and kind of just let it go and then come back to it in like a minute, then it will absolutely burn. And that's because that stuff is not very sturdy. It's not like a carrot, in which it will take maybe a minute or two or three for it to cook through. Garlic and ginger especially, that stuff can absolutely burn. So, but as long as you're very careful about the way that you approach the use of aromatic elements, that it won't burn. Cool. Good question though. Is the wok heat? Yeah, actually we did. So red elk, yeah, red elk is probably familiar with the same process that we do with bacon. Anytime that you'll find that in these streams, anytime I work with bacon, very, very frequently when I work with bacon on a wok, I do what we did today, which is add your bacon to cold heat or a cold wok and let the wok come up to temperature with the bacon in it. The same way that you would approach like pancetta in a Dutch oven. So very, very commonly that's what we do with the use of bacon in a wok, or at least how I approach it. What woks do I recommend? I think I already recommended. Yeah. So when I recommend woks, lots of folks have been asking me about wok recommendations. I mainly recommend just avoiding non-stick woks as much as possible. I have heard a lot of good things about the Joyce Chen wok, which you can find on Amazon. The Joyce Chen carbon steel wok. I have a friend that has one and he said it's really good. But personally for me, I got my wok at the corner store for like $10. And I don't even think it has a brand. It's just the wok that they carry at Chenko. And it works great. As long as it's made of the correct metal. All right, so the very last element that we're going to throw together here is our noodles. These are very, very fresh Chinese noodles that I actually picked up at the noodle shop down the street from me. If you don't have super fresh noodles, then you will want to be more specific about how you blanch these. We're going to do a very, very quick blanch. This is going to be like a 10-second blanch. That's because these noodles are extremely fresh. I think they were literally rolled and cut yesterday. So when your noodles are that fresh, you really don't even need to cook them. But if you're working with like a freeze-dried noodle, you do probably need to blanch it for like 5 minutes or so. And blanch meaning boil a pot of water and let it soak in that boiled water. Yeah, non-stick for a wok. I don't know why they even make those. Yeah, it just makes no sense to me because Teflon non-stick coatings will definitely prevent your wok from getting hot for the same reason that we don't use non-stick skillets in wok cooking, because non-stick skillets are not going to get hot enough for wok or for any kind of stir fry. So I really don't know why they would make them, and I also don't understand why when you go to places like Target or Walmart, those are the main ones that you find are non-stick skillets or non-stick woks. It's very silly. All right, so I'm weighing out. This is going to be 8 ounces of noodle. Let's do a little bit more. 8.5 ounces. And we're going to give this a quick blanch. If you've watched these streams before, you'll know that anytime we work with Asian noodles, we don't treat them the same way that we treat Italian noodles from Italian cooking, so like spaghetti or fettuccine, in which you boil a stock pot full of water, and you give it a stir for like 8 to 10 minutes, because those noodles are freeze-dried, and because they're dried, they take much longer to come back up to cooked temperature. For fresh noodles, specifically a fresh noodle, like a fresh egg noodle like this, but also true for like rice noodles and pretty much glass noodles, vermicelli, all of those things, much more delicate than an Italian noodle. So you don't want the aggressive heat of a stock pot because it will immediately overcook within like 10 seconds. So you don't want that aggressive heat. What you want to do instead is boil a pot of water, which I pre-boiled already. And then we're going to give these noodles a soak. So in this case, because our noodles are extremely fresh, I bought these at the noodle shop yesterday, which means that they were probably rolled yesterday. So they're about as fresh as noodles are going to get. I have found that when I work, so I've worked with this noodle shop's noodles before, and I found that even a long blanch will overcook them. So I'm going to flash blanch these for like probably 5 to 10 seconds. So just long enough to basically rinse off the residual flour from the noodles, and that's pretty much everything that we're going to do. So if you're working with noodles that are not as fresh, what you want to do is a similar process, but let it soak for a little bit longer. So probably another like a minute or two. Is probably the minute or two is probably the longest that I've ever gone on a jjajangmyeon noodle. Right, so since this is going to go really quickly, I'm going to get my strainer set up. Do it. So in goes the water. And then we're going to toss this pretty much just long enough to wash off that residual flour that's coated in. And then I'm going to remove it. So in Italian cooking, that's a big no-no. You're not supposed to pour out all of that water before reserving it. In Chinese cooking, we don't really have any use for that pasta water because we're substituting the use of pasta water, which you will frequently find comes up in Italian noodles. And we're going to substitute that with beef stock, which we added to our noodle dish a little bit earlier. So, over in our serving bowl, we have our sauce elements going on at the bottom of the bowl. And then I'm adding in my noodles. And then I'm going to add my meats on top of that. And then we're going to add our garnishes on top of that. So this is the greens of my green onions going on top. Followed by a pinch of cilantro. And a handful of crushed peanuts. And that is the traditional approach to Dan Dan Mian. So if you've watched me cook Dan Dan Mian before, I've definitely cooked Dan Dan Mian on stream before. You'll know that usually when I approach Dan Dan Mian, I approach it as an American or Americanized, Chinese Americanized noodle dish in which all of the noodles come together in the wok. So we would throw all of these elements, essentially what we just put into this bowl, into the wok itself, and then we toss everything in the wok heat for maybe like 30 seconds to a minute. And what that does is incorporates everything, similar to the way that you would throw it together like a carbonara or a bolognese. Very frequently I compare Chinese noodles to Italian noodles because everything is so different. They're basically polar opposites to me. But that's one similarity is that the way that it comes together is in the wok. In this case, this is probably the more traditional approach to Szechuan noodles, in which everything comes together in the serving bowl itself. And that, I think, is an artifact of the food culture in which it comes from, street food culture, which is essentially the process of because everything in street food is done on a really, really time crunch, and we're not really paying too much attention to plating because it's being put together on the street. So what essentially they're doing is just throwing everything into the bowl. So what happens here is our liquids and our solids are still separated. So what we're going to do, this is the way if you were to order it at a restaurant. So I'm referring specifically to Guilin noodle here in Oakland. When you order it at a restaurant, it comes and it looks like this. So it's like meats on top with garnishes on top of that, and then in the middle are the noodles, and then at the very, very bottom is just the sauce element. So essentially a soup base. Sometimes they'll even serve that soup base in a separate bowl on the side. So they'll serve it to you, and then you give this all a toss, and everything will incorporate for itself. And you'll notice that it's still a little bit liquidy and loose, so it's a little bit like soupy. And what happens is over the course of the time that you eat this, soupiness and that liquid element is going to start tightening up. So it becomes a little bit more tight and a little bit more thick in quality and more saucy. And then you get more of a pasta-like quality to it once it sort of like hydrates with itself with the noodle. So you get kind of like two different experiences with your noodle. The first is basically as a soup, which is why you serve it with a soup spoon. And the second is halfway through the dish, you'll find that the sauce itself starts to hydrate. And the second half of your eating experience is as a much more thick and rich noodle dish, which is probably what you're more familiar with when we refer to Dan Dan Mian. So that's my approach to Dan Dan Mian. If you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the comments. I know that we have folks watching on both on Reddit and YouTube, which is super cool. We just started streaming on YouTube, which is super fun. And I'm just kind of learning a little bit more about the way that YouTube streaming works. And I don't even think YouTube knows how YouTube streaming works. But that's super fun because I know lots of folks who follow the Reddit streams have followed over to YouTube. So I know that when we're streaming on YouTube, we're just streaming to lots of folks who found me on Reddit streaming. COVID 2100, yeah, welcome back. That's cool. I know on Reddit, I've definitely seen lots of you pop up before, including COVID 2100 and Red Oku. Both of you I've definitely seen around before, as well as a couple other folks who popped up in the chat a little bit earlier. So as always, thank you for tuning in and sticking around and contributing to the chat. It's always more fun when folks have an active chat going on because it's nice to talk to folks and kind of talk a little bit more about the way that I like approaching cooking and like coming together with like recipes, especially with things like Dan Dan Mian, which there's really not one way of cooking it. There's like lots and lots of ways of cooking it depending on like which culture that you're coming from. I know that I've definitely eaten at Shanghainese restaurants that serve Dan Dan Mian, which serve it in a Shanghainese approach, which is essentially the way that I do it, which is very, very Americanized. It all comes together in a wok, versus the way that a Szechuan approach comes together. Ooh, we forgot our Szechuan peppercorn. It's like the most important ingredient. The very last thing, I meant to add this on top, but you do, when you use Szechuan peppercorn, want to add that stuff at the very, very end, so at the latest possible time. And that's because Szechuan peppercorn will definitely get washed away if you throw it in too early. So, but when it does come into contact with liquids and hot oils, it releases all of that capsaicin, and that's all where all of the numbing qualities of Szechuan peppercorn come from. So, thanks everyone for tuning in. If you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about Dan Dan Mian or Szechuan cooking or Chinese cooking or wok cooking, but I do know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least entertaining to watch. If I missed your question, feel free to repeat it. I know that I miss stuff all the time because the computer's behind me and sometimes I'm facing the stove and I miss stuff. If you're interested in reproducing this particular recipe yourself, I recommend hopping over to YouTube, where we're working our way to a 1,000 subscriber goal by the end of December. I'm pretty sure that we're going to make it, although it kind of depends on how often I stream over the next like 3 weeks. But if you haven't already subscribed, or if you're currently watching on YouTube and haven't already subscribed, I recommend giving that a subscribe because Hamcharo pops up. Hamcharo is the hamster that eats ramen. He was my favorite little guy. Hamcharo is very hungry, and he only gets to eat ramen when someone subscribes. So, on YouTube, you will find all of the recorded recipe videos that go along with pretty much everything that we cook here. So, a couple months ago, we did a recipe video for the recipe for this Dan Dan Mian. The way that I had approached that was using peanut butter, which is how my mom always made Dan Dan Mian for me. And I did not know until much, much later that the use of peanut butter is a very American thing. Yeah, I used peanut butter, and I think I also used fettuccine, which was not my favorite substitution, but when I did this for the video, the noodles went bad, so that was a real bummer. But yes, other than that, if you're not already subscribed, definitely hop over to YouTube and check that out. Tomorrow we're coming up with a Westlake soup recipe that's loosely based off of a Westlake soup from a restaurant in San Francisco that no longer exists called Dragon House. And that's a noodle, a soup that I've been eating since I was a little kid. That's essentially a Chinese egg drop soup with a bunch of other stuff going on. Last Friday, we did a recipe for the sweet custard buns from Legend of Korra. The Friday before that, I don't remember anymore. I think we did pumpkin curry was before that. But yeah, we've been coming out with new recipes every Friday. Been kind of working our way through all of the Panda Express menu. Lately, I've been working my way through recreating a lot of dishes from a lot of local restaurants here in Oakland. So we did a pad see ew that's coming up very soon. That's loosely based off of a pad see ew from a restaurant here in Oakland called Ni Cha Thai. Tomorrow we're releasing the soup from Dragon House in San Francisco. Following that, I'm working on a Chinese meatball dish called Lion's Head Meatballs. That's going to come up pretty soon. I also have a super long list of things that folks have requested that I've kind of working my way through. I'm pretty confident that I can do almost all of them except for the mac salad from L&L Drive-In, which I don't have any idea how to do that. Because I'm pretty sure you would need to make your own mayonnaise for that. But yeah, so Red Oak, yeah, I'm Red Oak, I'm assuming you're from Oakland. If you are from Oakland and have eaten some of these dishes before or have eaten at some of these restaurants before, I'd love to hear from you and see if you have any ideas for like cool requests. I know someone requested the Shinmai ramen, which I think it was the tonkatsu ramen, which I'm very scared of because ramen is like liquid gold. Like ramen broth is like liquid gold, and like trying to replicate a ramen broth is like trying to replicate the recipe to Doritos or something. It's like, I don't know. Like, I'm probably not going to be able to replicate that, but I probably can come pretty close. I can probably make a really good ramen. That's probably what I'll do. And that's probably where we're going to end up with. But definitely like ramen broth recipes are kind of like the recipes that are like family secrets that are guarded for like hundreds of years. So that's going to be really tricky, but it will be fun to attempt though, for sure. So stuff like that, content like that. If you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to YouTube, or if you're already on YouTube, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel. That's at youtube.com/WooCanCook at the bottom of the screen. Lots of fun content like that popping up. We're working our way to 1,000 subscribers by the end of December. Please feed him Charo. He's very hungry, and he only gets to eat ramen when folks subscribe. So if you're already subscribed, please also share the channel, tell your friends, tell your friends' friends, tell your girlfriend, stuff like that. All right, I'll see you guys soon.
coming out of left field? Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Got another mouth to feed. Leaving with the babysitter, mama call the grave digger. Gone with the fallen leaves. Am I coming out of left field? Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might have had your fill, I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, I can feel it still. We could fight a war for peace. Give in to that easy living, goodbye to my hopes and dreams. Stop flipping for my enemies. We could wait until the walls come down. It's time to give a little to the kids in the middle, but oh, until it falls, won't bother me. I'm a rebel just for kicks. Yeah, your lovers and a bitch for my heart to eclipse. Might be over now, but I feel it still. I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Might have had your fill, I can feel it still. Keep my hands on myself. Think I'll dust them off, put them back up on the shelf. Case my little baby girl is in need. Am I coming out of left